like to start this last session with a very simple meditation to slowly move into this Vipasana practice of emptiness. And I'd like to do something quite simple, hopefully, and we're going to look at this idea of the plant, the idea of causes and conditions, parts and labelling, as a sort of starting point for the Vipasana practice. And then tomorrow we're going to look at the Vipasana practice particularly in terms of focusing on ourself as a person. But I thought it would be good just to try something a little bit more simple, just to sort of get a bit of a feel for it this afternoon, before we sort of launch into that tomorrow. So let's do that. So short 20-minute meditation.
Is there differentiation between person and self?
Person,
The two terms.
yeah. So generally, when we talk about Vipasana practice, the word self is referring to an overinflated false sense of me. So in Vipasana, self does not exist. Never has existed, cannot exist. Person exists. Me exists. You exist. But we do not exist in this overinflated way called self. Okay, let's do this practice. So finding that nice, comfortable posture, keeping the back nice and straight, and allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. And with each out breath, letting go any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Wherever you most easily notice sensations associated with the breathing. Let's now do a very simple Vipasana meditation. And so we're going to use as a basis for this meditation a plant. So imagine a single plant in front of you. How does that plant appear to you? Does it appear to be a single thing, existing from its own side? If the plant exists from its own side, it should be findable. Can you find the plant anywhere amongst that basis? Is there anything there that is a plant from its own side, independent of your conception? Is there anything in the leaves that is a plant from its own side? Is there anything in the stem or branches that is a plant from its own side? Is there anything in the roots that is a plant from its own side, independent of conceptual framework? wherever we look, we just see parts of a plant. Is the plant simply then the collection of these parts? Each part is not a plant. And so the collection of these parts is simply a collection of things, none of which is a plant. Where is a plant to be found amongst a collection of things, none of which is a plant? Yet, other than these parts, what plant is there? We don't seem to be able to find the plant, that doesn't mean the plant doesn't exist. The plant exists depending on other factors. It exists depending on causes and conditions, such as the seed, soil, sunlight, and water. Other than this continuous unfolding of causes and conditions, what plant is there? And it exists depending on its parts, such as the roots, stem and leaves. Other than merely these parts, what plant is there? and the plant exists depending on our conceptual framework. Other than just this labelling, what plant is there? Any questions about that?
Can you say that there is no objective world outside? Is it always subjective and dependent on our conceptual thinking about it? Or merely,
so the question is, there's no, can you say that, what?
If you depart to objective world, things are existing objectively.
You mean independently? Right, and so then can you say everything's subjective? Is this big?
Depends.
On what?
Depend on other things.
So object depends on subject?
No, but this...
Subject depends on object?
Okay.
So when you say subjective, what do you really mean? Do you mean like there's subject-object, but object doesn't exist, only subject exists?
No.
Oh.
I think about the determination of objective world, which you say like the question of the tree falling
Sure,
down.
sure.
If it exists,
Sure.
or if it doesn't exist at all.
Right. So there are a number of different philosophical systems within Buddhism, because the Buddha taught according to people's capacity. And at the sort of the simple level, and we saw that a little bit earlier, is that there is an objective world, no problem. The problem is simply how we see ourselves as a person. We overinflate me. We grasp onto this autonomous self. That's the problem. Then there are another two philosophical schools in Buddhism that says, well, actually, there is no independent objective world. One of those schools then concludes that everything is subjective, that there appears to be a material world, but actually that's an illusion. It's a bit like idealist position. That even though there appears to be a material world here, that's an illusion. It's actually internal to our mind. It's completely subjective. And they appeal to the dream to sort of back up their claim a little bit. They say, well, also in a dream, you touch things and that feels pretty solid in the dream. But then, of course, when we become lucid in the dream, we'll know that that's an illusion. There is no solid world, it's in the mind. So they say, well, there's sort of an analogy to show our position. That is position, the school called Chittamatra, or mind only in Buddhism. That's not this position that we're talking about here. They would also, this is based on what's called the Madhyamika philosophical, middle way philosophical system, and they would also agree with the Chittamatrans in saying, well, yes, the way the world is appearing to us is deceiving us, it's an illusion, but it's not that it's some internal subjective world. Rather, there is interdependent subject-object, meaning there is an external world, but it's not independent. It's not internal to the mind. It's not purely subjective. So that's the view that we're sort of following here, this view. So they would criticise the Chittamatra people, the ones who say everything's subjective, and they say, well, just as you investigated the supposed external world, independent world, and you came to see it didn't exist like that, what you need to do is apply the same critique to your mind. And you can come to see also there is no independent existing mind either. And then you can drop that and find the middle way.
So one is asking about if it exists, and the other is asking how it exists. Right?
No, both of these philosophical schools are looking at how the world exists, and they both agree that it's not existing in the way that it appears to us. You know, there appears to be an independent, objective world there. So they both agree that if we investigate, we'll come to realise that's not how it exists. But they come to different conclusions. The Chittamatrans conclude that it's an internal world, it's purely subjective. There's no material world at all. That's an illusion. Whereas the Madhyamika system, which we're following, is saying there is an external world, but it's not independent. It's interdependent world. So they come to two different conclusions, that's all. But they both reject that there is an independent external world.
So who's right?
So with all of these different philosophical schools, we need to investigate. Because each one of them will claim we're right, you're wrong, they'll say of the other schools. So we, as a scientist, should not accept any of these on face value, you know, because this view is the one that's basically accepted in the Tibetan Buddhism and so forth. And we go, oh yeah, I accept that because that's what Tibetan Buddhists accept. That's not going to help us. So we need to look at these different views and see whether they make sense, and then bring them into experience and see what the result is. We need to check them, test them ourselves. And of course, all of the schools provide a way to do that. So it's up to us as good scientists to investigate and see which one is actually correct. We have to do the work. Yes.
But that's a subjective claim, what you were just saying. That's itself, it's a subjective claim.
Subjective claim.
Yeah, I mean, you yourself need to investigate. So it's in your eyes, it's subjective.
Your experience.
Why? What do you mean by subjective?
Each one can feel it otherwise. And
The bottom line is, do we overcome mental afflictions and suffering or not?
Maybe, yeah. I guess
If we
that
do,
both
then
can,
if both can do, then both are correct.
Yeah.
Both are good.
Yeah.
Because remember, we're not trying to be philosophers here. You know, we're not trying to say, well, I've got the smartest view. My view is more intelligent than yours. That's not the goal. The goal is to overcome mental afflictions and suffering. So if you follow one of these and you do that, then end of story. Good. Very good.
I think all of them can. I think all systems can overcome suffering.
The question is, of course, I think they all are better worldviews than we've got now, so they will help us to reduce our mental afflictions and suffering. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taught because it wouldn't be useful. You know, the Buddha didn't just teach it because it sounded good. He taught it because it was helpful. So the test is, of course, can this view bring us the whole way, or we sort of are still a little bit short of the goal. That's what we can check.
I don't understand I understand the philosophy, I don't understand how it can bring me to the goal. I mean, I tried, now we've done this meditation and...
Right. So the question is, how can... So remember the...
What is the connection between seeing the independence and all this and my suffering?
Right.
I can't,
Because if we realize emptiness or dependency, and we see nice flowers, and we have a nice experience, then we will realize from our meditation directly that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
it's attachment.
No, it's not. Beauty in the object is attachment, leads to attachment.
I mean, I understand the attachment idea.
Right.
We spoke about
An
it
attachment.
before, but now when I look at the dependency, I don't understand what does it help me with seeing suffering or... Okay, so things are dependent on other... Nothing stands by itself.
Right.
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 What do I do with that?
You bring that intellectual understanding into experience through meditation. And you come to, so this meditation, you do these meditations with a more calm, clear, focused mind, and you come to directly realize experientially that everything is interdependent, not just intellectually. Intellectual ideas is not going to get us very far.
Okay, so it's interdependent.
Right? Then it would be impossible to have any mental afflictions or suffering.
Why?
Why? This is the connection I couldn't...
There's nothing to grab.
Because this is what we looked in this chart this morning, is that now we don't see interdependency. So when we experience something as pleasurable, then for us it appears as if that's not interdependent, it's independent. So it seems like there must be something attractive there that's causing my pleasant experience. So that seems to be the source of my happiness, so I want that thing. This is attachment. So that can only happen if we have this false view of it being independent. If we can see the interdependency, that the flowers, the beauty exists within our conceptual framework, then there's nothing there from its own side that is beautiful. So we can simply enjoy the beauty and there's nothing to have craving and attachment for. Again,
But how is it connected to the way it's built, the parts, the cause and conditions?
It's the understanding that flowers exist depending on cause and conditions, parts, and labelling. We don't understand that. Intellectually, yes, maybe. Experientially, no. Experientially, that's not how we see these flowers or anything. We don't experientially see them as merely existing depending on their parts. When we see one solid thing. And that thing seems to be completely independent of us and seems to be, if I'm having a pleasant experience, it seems to be the source of my happiness. So give me that thing.
Maybe a better example is an annoying person.
Well, the opposite, yeah.
Exactly, people. Better example.
So same with people.
An annoying person.
Yeah. The same thing is that, let's say someone's saying something critical to us and we get upset, annoyed, we get angry, you know. What are we actually perceiving is some sound waves hitting our eardrum.